Hi, I'm Jane Farnham from Great British Speakers, and welcome to our series of video podcasts where we meet our amazing speakers who are all available for your corporate events. Essentially, it's an opportunity for you to find out more about our speakers and also to find out what they talk about and how they can add value to your business. So today, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Petra Velzeboer. Velzeboer. Did I get that right? I asked you before we started, and I know I was going to get it wrong.
I think you did well.
Brilliant. I see I can do something right. Lovely. Thank you very much. I do try. It's lovely to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Now, you've got quite an incredible backstory, which started with growing up in a cult. So was that from when you were a teeny tiny baby?
Yeah, so I was very specifically born into a religious cult called the Children of God. I'm Dutch by passport, but grew up all over the world in hippie communes, I guess, but with a belief system that sort of got a bit toxic over time, thinking the world was going to end and, not going to school, figuring a few things out along the way.
Quite crikey, that's quite a start, isn't it? I mean, everybody's heard of cults, but I don't often meet people who've been born into one. So it's quite staggering to try to get my head around that to start off with. So you've become a little bit of a leader in mental health. So how did you go from being in a cult, escaping that cult, and then shaping who you are today?
Great question. Of course, it's a journey, right? These things never just start at the beginning and then end in a certain place. There's this whole messy middle, right? Which is figuring out who you are and adapting to, I guess, a new world, a world that I wasn't prepared for growing up. So we very much were taught that the world was going to end. I didn't go to school as a kid. I grew up in India, Brazil, Russia, Kenya, sort of all over the place, very mission driven, focusing on helping others, but also as long as you were part of the tribe, it was fine. And when you weren't, you'd get ostracized, kicked out, punished, these sorts of things. And so I guess when I left at 22, I was pregnant. I moved to London with my partner who was outside of the cult. And that's when I started to really spiral, which was, I guess I was safe, you could say. So it wasn't so much an escape as a transition. But that's when I developed depression, alcohol addiction, just all the traumas from the past sort of sparking up. And I guess my pursuit around mental health was first to help myself. And then I trained as a psychotherapist and continued to do a master's and, did everything. I guess I started my life at 24 and then did my career and developed into a mental health consultant and the person you see on stage today.
Wow. So your journey started with it was almost like a survival from your trauma and learning how to deal with all that yourself. And then obviously learning more about the bigger picture around trauma and psychotherapy and mental health in general. So you then, did you work within mental health before you set up your business?
Absolutely. So I started in youth mental health. So I worked with kids who'd been kicked out of school, who were young offenders. I guess I was interested in the ones who maybe didn't have the perfect set of cards given to them in life. And, how could I support or be there for them? And I realized through my own journey of getting sober and looking after my own mental health that you could actually teach yourself to be happy, to engage in society, that community connection, being a good kind of employee or leader were skills that you could develop. And so I certainly put myself to the task of developing them myself, and then realized so many people are struggling and don't realize that there are mindset tools, there are skills that we can use to invest in our own mental health. It's not just, I sat in the victim mode for a hell of a long time thinking, I didn't go to school as a kid, my parents this, the cult that, but it was only hurting me in the end and then my own children. So at some point we've got to take responsibility for our own mental health. And then I certainly speak about how corporates have some cult tendencies and have those toxic hierarchies as well. So I guess I've got a little bit of edge on what that looks like and how to change it.
Yeah, your journey in this, it certainly starts with you. It's all about accountability and reflecting on things and actually, doing things that are positive and in the right way, but they are tools, and they are tools that anybody can learn, but it just takes time and a lot of effort. I mean, you do have to dig deep. It's a whole journey, isn't it? Some days you have great. I mean, I've gone through my own, traumas over the years, and you just think, crikey, does life get any easier? But it does once you learn these tools. They're just so vital every day. And I think the older you get, the more important they become. It's quite. You'd think it'd be the other way around, but I really think it's not. I think these skills are something that we need and inherently need, and we should be taught them at a very young age, even in schools and colleges, and learning about these vital things. You started your business, so it's called VPL. So how does your team now help businesses create positive mental cultures, so healthy cultures within corporates?
Yeah, so as you know, I'm a keynote speaker, so I like offering the vision of what's possible. So often when we think of mental health, we think of what to do when things go wrong. And for us, it's actually, what does a mentally healthy culture even look like? What are we aiming towards? So we help businesses to think about what that looks like and really connect the dots between performance. If you think of an athlete, right, who's winning at the Olympics, is the fastest person in the world, they've had 4 years of training. You talked about the journey like this, right? You've got people backing you up. You've got leadership. You've got nutrition. You've got rest and recovery seasons, and you've got seasons where you're pushing yourself to the absolute max. And so I'd like more organizations to think about mental health and well-being in a similar way. So it's not just a policy that's over here that's a nice to have and we think about on awareness days, but it's actually integral to your business objectives. So like connecting those dots. So me and my team help the C-suite exec level kind of help them connect the dots. We help HR get a well-being strategy in place that's aligned to business objectives. And then we do the leadership training, manager training and support to develop the behaviors and the skills, because it's all good and well having a policy or strategy. But if it's not being lived, if leaders don't know how to lead by example in opening up and thinking about these things together as a team, you're kind of missing a trick.
It's definitely a trickle down, isn't it, from the top? I always think some of the best schools are led by the best headmasters, and if you don't have a decent head, then the school goes to pot. And it's same in business. You have to. You have to lead by example. You can't just repeat mantras. You have to implement them day to day.
You
And I
absolutely do.
think one of the big things that we see at the moment is a lot of burnout within corporate companies, where we just keep on striving and pushing. So, what would you say the biggest key driver is in preventing burnout amongst your employees?
So people think burnout is just about workload or the amount that we have to do, but it's also about digital overwhelm, historical trauma. Do you have the tools to let out stress so that it's not stacking up over time and not being released from your body? Do you have boundaries? Are you able to communicate boundaries effectively? Which all starts with self-awareness, knowing how to listen to your body. But in a very rushed society that's very much in survival mode, so everything feels urgent, everything feels like it must be done now, and we're all quite afraid. So if you think of the media and the news and all these things just spouting fear and consumerism into our minds, so many of us, our nervous systems are wired the whole time, right? So we're having trouble sleeping. We might even be doing the workout, but we're not ever kind of settling into our body and reflecting, is this type of workout what my body needs at this stage? We know that movement is the single best way to release stress. And there's other ways as well, fun ways like laughter and singing and all sorts of things, right? But so many of us in our lifestyles of sitting and sitting in front of our screens, we're just not doing those things as much. And so it's the stacking, sometimes over years, that then shows up. It seems like suddenly, but it certainly isn't. And it shows up as burnout. It can take an average of 2 years to recover from burnout. So like when people say I haven't got time for these well-being tools and practices, I'm like, hey, have you got 2 years to recover? Right? That's the flip, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the amount of time people sort of say, I haven't got time to exercise, but you know, couple of years down the line, if you haven't exercised, the consequences are just, just far outweigh a little bit of effort in the meantime. I mean, I could talk to you all day about these. It's just
Yeah.
amazing. But when you go into a business, what are the first practical tips that you give leaders to lead by example and create this healthy culture within the business? Do you get them out in like a practical skill, maybe a couple that you can share with us now to get, leaders really sort of getting their employees on board with this?
So, for any behavior change, you want to have the experience of something, not just the theory of it. So, there's so many kind of training modules out there about psychological safety, for example, or well-being or mental health, whatever it might be. But so often it's not actually practiced within that senior exec level, within that manager level. And so everybody says the right things like, oh, we have a flexible working policy, or we have an annual leave policy, or this is what I hear all the time. My people know that they can look after their well-being. And then I ask, how do they know? Right? They're like, well, we've got this thing, right? And it's often, do you actually talk about it as a team? Are you one to do some of those things? Because I don't know if you have kids, but our kids will look at what we do, not what we say. And it's a similar thing in the workplace. People are clocking what they do, whether it's your Teams, Microsoft Teams Lite being on the whole time if you're remote, or whether it's clocking who's in the office and who isn't at certain times, right? So it's imperative that leaders actually openly have conversations, not just about poor mental health, because this is what people think is like, oh, if we're going to do a drive, we have to talk about when we've struggled. We need to talk about when we get it right as well. Like, hey, I've got this big pitch tomorrow. I'm going to get an early night and kind of chill on the drinking because it's going to put me in a good position to do really well. So that's like openly connecting the dots between what's in our control and how we perform. And then, of course, we know things like the suicide rate is really high. We want to be looking out for each other. But normalizing open conversations is the crucial skill, and it takes bravery. So I talk a lot about like it's actually practicing bravery, and you'll see the mostly male boardrooms at the top, they sort of lean in and they want to be brave, right? Being vulnerable sounds a little bit scarier, but really it's two sides of the same coin. So getting some experience in and showing them in their day-to-day life how they can do it, not just on an awareness day.
So the older I get, the more people that I meet that they're not even aware that they are unable to take accountability. They spout the correct things, but deep down, that's not who they are. So have you got an example whereby you've worked with a leader who's just, he or she may not have been living by, these healthy skill sets that we know is attributable to good, positive mental health, but then they turned it around, and it was a journey for them as much as their staff. I mean, have you seen that in action in real time?
So
Because
many
it takes
times.
time to learn about mental health, and
It does, but it's
yeah.
also very
So
prevalent.
but that is huge.
So I'm seeing, if I sit in a senior leadership team and I ask people, how do you invest in yourself? So it's a very different question than what's your self-care routine, right? Even though it's getting to the same outcome in a way. Or how has mental health impacted you? These sorts of questions that kind of feel safe, but a little bit confronting. And I will get 80% of the room will say, hey, my daughter is in an eating disorder unit, or my best mate took his life, or me and my wife are going through a divorce, or I'm experiencing burnout right now, right? So everyone's got some kind of story going on, which is just our human experience. And yet all we need is permission. And often me telling my story helps give people that permission, because they're like, oh, right, you're successful and showing up on stage, and you also have a story, right? Which is really what everybody has. So it's those little experiences where you go, see, we're all just human having a human experience, trying to get some outcomes done at work. And it should be more connecting than divisive. And we live in a world of distraction where we numb our emotions and our feelings. It's so easy to do that. And we're just avoiding that accountability.
Absolutely, it's terrifying. I mean, because everything is becoming so divisive. I was chatting to a friend of mine the other day who was, um, they were listening to somebody, a speaker who she wasn't on the same page with, and she was unable to articulate that to anybody in the room because everybody's just afraid of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing because everything's based on fear, and we're being fed all this notion of who we should be and what we should be instead of being our true authentic selves. And I just feel like it's music to my ears that you're going around sort of corporations talking about this because it's so utterly vital to human nature.
Well, and because of my experience in a cult, I'm also really well versed in groupthink. And that's when in any type of group, whether it's your
Yeah.
family, whether it's an organization, we tend to agree with the majority or the most powerful person in the room because we're afraid that if we didn't, we'll be ostracized, we'll lose our paycheck, whatever the fear business is, right? So let's take meeting culture, for example. It's the most inefficient thing in so many places at the moment. Too many people in too many meetings having to do their work at the end of the day after hours, and everyone's colluding like this is normal, right? When actually it's only since the pandemic and we first were remote and now we're hybrid that we just stacked on more and more meetings that we don't all have to be in that are massively inefficient. And yet our group think is keeping us going, well, I want to keep my job. Like some places are restructuring. I guess I'm going to sit in another meeting and complain about it over here. So, as much as leaders are responsible for change, there's a grassroots element as well that is possible to just kind of, in a solution focused way, call out the practices and the systems that are inefficient. We can all take responsibility for that. And I see you smiling. I think we could talk about this all day, right?
Oh, he's so good. I think this is just it's music to my ears. It's just to me, it seems like common sense. There's so many things that happen in the world that don't make sense anymore, and the groupthink mentality, is just so prevalent at the moment, and everybody's afraid of saying, being themselves, and I think it's terrifying. So I'm so glad that you're imparting all of this. Common sense approach to business, human interaction, social interaction, and engagement. I think it's brilliant. Now, you've also spoken about mental health in the digital age because, we talk about burnout. I mean, it's not just about physical activity, it's mentally. These things, they're the bane of our lives. So how can we put boundaries in place to boost performance, but still remain connected? Because it's something I'm trying to do at the moment. I need to put my phone away. And then the next thing I know, I'm going like, oh, where's my phone? What have I done with it? And everything's on your phone. So how do we separate digitization and our digital life from being healthy?
Yeah, so I've just finished writing a book on digital well-being. It's coming out soon. So I've been deep in the research on it and trying to talk to lots of people. And, if you look at Johan Hari's work, his book, Stolen Focus, he talks about, the system is set up against us. It's about billions of pounds being spent on competing for our attention. Right. And so no wonder we're all sort of falling prey every once in a while because we're fighting against a very large machine that is there to keep it interesting, keep our dopamine sensors kind of excited and to keep coming back. Right. We feel like that's our way to connect, and to not be connected is to be ostracized. And of course, if you look at the Center for Humane Technology, what it's doing to our kids' brains and to our sense of loneliness and isolation is horrific when you actually look at the data. So there's a massive issue here that with AI and kind of technology moving forward in a bigger way, we really do need to consciously think about. And the first step is to reflect and consciously think about it. So when's the last time you said, what's the relationship that I want to have with my device? Or get honest feedback. So with a spouse, with a friend, with a partner, hey, do you think my device is affecting my ability to have quality relationships? And really listen to the feedback. And I've had to be on the receiving end of this where I've been in relationships or with my kids and be like, hey, your phone's in the room with us, right? So honest reflection, accountability, get some honest feedback from the people closest to you. And this is like challenging group think. It's like, hey, who do we want to be? And then get some accountability buddies. That could be a work colleague, it could be a friend, it could be a coach, whatever it might look like, even a manager. And just say, hey, I'd love you to call me out on my practices sometimes. But it starts with knowing what you want. So often we're thinking, oh my God, I spent my night scrolling and I didn't sleep well, and now I'm going to eat poorly. It's like this cycle, right? So the machine is set up against us, but it does mean I actually went to something called the Offline Club recently. So this is a grassroots project that started in Holland and is now in London, where people will pay €9 for their phone to be locked up, to be in a room for 2-3 hours where they do art and they talk. It's like an old, drawing room where you play piano and stuff. And it's like these things are making a comeback, which is fascinating to me.
That is brilliant. I'm going to have to find a local one. For me, it's actually this morning I decided when I woke up, I thought, right, I'm going to try and step outside these bad habits that I've formed. And I just refused to pick up my phone for 2 hours this morning. And I'm lucky enough to live on the beach. And I walked across to the beach and I was just thinking, this is what I need to do more of every day, and put my phone away with the kids and be more present. And these are things that we know we need to do, but it's so vitally important just to regain some humanity. And this holistic approach to life is just so much more important than running to fulfill something that will never be fulfilled. But I can't really think about a business who wouldn't benefit from you talking to them. But what would you say your biggest takeaway is, and what's the feedback that you've heard that really makes you very proud to do what you do?
Yeah, I was at a conference last week actually, and there was amazing speakers. There was an amazing lineup, and so many of them were so brilliantly smart. But there was a lot of theory, and there was a lot of highlighting what the problem is, and not much time spent on what's the solution.
A lot of
And
work.
so, yeah, so the feedback I always get is that I'm high energy. I get people doing things pretty quickly, and that it's practical and realistic. And so that's as simple as like, check your influences. If you feel, because I've had questions at the end of keynotes where like this really young woman, I remember clearly, she must have been in her 20s. She said, I'm doing all the things, Petra. She went, I'm having a cold shower. I'm waking up at 5 a.m. I'm meditating. I'm going for a walk. I'm journaling, like whatever it was. There must have been 8 things she mentioned. And she said, my anxiety's through the roof, right? And I was like, well, no wonder. Sounds stressful just listening to you. So I would prefer if people like tune into themselves and do one small thing that really feels right for them at the time. So I guess I'm always challenging behavior change and making things really practical for people. And that feels inspiring because they're like, oh, we can take something away right now and do something different to change our culture.
Well, I've absolutely loved finding out more about what you talk about. I don't know anybody who wouldn't benefit from listening to you talk. It seems like really effective, common sense behaviors that we can teach our employees, but also, it's that trickle down approach, but also our children, our families, my parents. You could just take this wherever you go because it's a healthy, positive attitude, but also effective. I just think it's great. So thank you so much for your time today, Petra. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me.